We had the crazy idea of using this space in the Congress to interview relevant surgeons to understand what's their feeling, their thoughts, their ideas, their problems in spine surgery. So we hope that it gives you some ideas, some light, some inspiration on your work. Let me introduce you to the interviewer, Claudio Lamartina, past chair of AO Spine Europe and my partner in the G-Spine 4 service of spine surgery in Galeazzi Hospital in Milan. Claudio?
Thank you very much, Pedro. It's a very pleasure to have you for this interview. We know that you are really experienced in this field, in sagittal alignment or sagittal balance. My question is, we know that there is a very strong relationship between the pelvic incidence and the lumbar lordosis. Less between the pelvic incidence and thoracic kyphosis, a significant less between the pelvic incidence and cervical lordosis. The question is, do you have a new fact that can help us when we plan a surgery about thoracic and cervical parameters?
Thank you, Claudio, for your invitation. We did so many meetings together. We did so many meetings together, and we share ideas. So, to answer your question, I think that the first point is to say that the sagittal balance is a reality. As soon as a human are standing means that you have to deal with the balance. So we have to solve the problem. We have to solve the problem daily in our practice. I fully agree with you that the first thing that was demonstrated by Madame Duval-Beaupère was the high relationship between the lordosis and the pelvic incidence. And this is the base for all the surgeries every day. The correlation with the thoracic kyphosis was lower, but we took the C7 point, the C7 vertebra as a reference, and the correlation was still good. And I think that the thoracolumbar spine is linked with the pelvis. If we speak about the cervical, we have to think inversely. Here, the head is the most important. As Jean Dubousset said, the most important is to keep the head over the pelvis. At this point, the head works as an inverse pendulum over the thorax. The thorax becomes the base, and then we have the cervical spine. According to the position of the head, the cervical spine will adapt. And we showed in our paper we published last year that the shape of the cervical spine was not always lordotic. Only 50% of the population in a normal, asymptomatic, pain-free situation are lordotic. The others are straight, and others are even a little bit kyphotic. So what we saw is that it's the same that we saw in the lumbar spine. Roussouly showed that the lumbar lordosis finish not at the level L1, but sometimes T12, T11. It's the same for the cervical spine. The cervical spine doesn't finish at C7. The anatomy has nothing to do there. The cervical spine finish at T3, T4. Because when we measure the angulation and the position of the head, considering the thorax, the angles are the same from C2 to C7, T1, T2, T3, T4. So the sagittal balance of the cervical spine is almost, as you say, independent from the bottom.
Okay. Thank you. This is really interesting. You remember Jean Dubousset proposed to consider the pelvis like a vertebra. Are you proposing to consider a vertebra also the head?
Yes, the most difficult part is that if you take the head as a vertebra, you have to put it upside down. So it's not really easy for people because we always think that the base of support is the most important, and you want to keep the top on the base of support. Here, the vertebra, if it is the head, is on the top. On the base of support is very, very small. So here the muscles are very, very important, even more important than in the lumbar spine. Because to keep the head, it's only a question of muscle contraction, muscle control. This is the reason why in the elderly, even if the discs are still good, they often flex the head like this. And the forehead posture is very common. This is one of the main reason why we have PGKs, because the muscles are not good. It's correlated with the quality of the muscles in the thorax too.
Okay. One more point. What's the role of the hips in the spinopelvic system?
Of course, the hips are important because we know that the capacity of anteversion of the pelvis or retroversion of the pelvis is linked with the quality of the hip. When people have hip arthrosis, they have hip phlegm, and they can't retroverse the pelvis, so they are unable to increase their base of support. If the hips are normal, no problem. The problem is to solve the problem in the spine. If the hips are abnormal, it's very important to start with the hip to restore the capacity to have a better base of support. Yeah.
This is very important take-home message. If we have a problem in the hips, first we have to treat the hips, and then eventually we treat the spine.
I fully agree with that. The second problem is that when the hip is normal, with a hip arthroplasty, for instance, and if the lumbar spine is totally flat, you will have a pelvic retroversion to compensate. And you can create problems with your hip arthroplasty. That means the gap between the hip problem solution and the lumbar problem treatment should be correlated. If you have a complete loss of lumbar lordosis, you will have to solve the problem quickly after the hip arthroplasty.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Jean-Charles. It was a great pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.